Hello everyone, my name is Kong Shrinani and welcome to my YouTube channel, NeuroChat with AG. On this channel, I plan to cover topics that are closest to my heart and support the neurodiverse community. Topics related to neurodiversity, autism, late autism diagnosis, and autism in women and girls. I will interview thought leaders, esteemed researchers, scientists, professors, doctors, and psychologists and seek their views and updates on their latest work and research. I will also chat with parents of neurodiverse kids and adults and talk about experiences of neurodiverse individuals. Lastly, keeping inclusivity as a topmost priority, we might also discuss controversial disparate views for a collective understanding of issues and respect for diverse views. All the views and topics discussed are for informational purposes only. If you are interested in watching more quality content on this topic, please hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to press the bell icon to be notified whenever a new video is uploaded. Please also share the channel with your friends, family, and social media platforms. Thank you. Mr. Jonah Fishel is the founder of NextStep Prep, a tutoring service specializing in supporting students with learning differences, including those on the autism spectrum. With over a decade of experience, Jonah has dedicated his career to helping students who struggle in traditional educational settings by offering personalized one-on-one tutoring and test preparation. His journey began as a mentor in a juvenile detention center, where he learned the value of building confidence and making learning accessible to all students. Through his compassionate, individualized approach, Jonah works to empower students with unique needs, helping them thrive academically and emotionally. Today, he is also pursuing a Master's of Education while continuing to shape the future of educational support for students with learning differences. Mr. Fishell, welcome and thank you very much for the time today.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and to jump right into it, and thank you for coming. Could you talk about your background and journey so far?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's something I never thought that I would get into to the degree that I have, really. I mean, I studied storytelling in college, which was a self-design major. And in the education stuff was something I figured would be a second career. You know, it was something I was interested in, but I was pursuing the sort of humanities, linguistic stuff, and I was pursuing religious studies. But we moved to Philadelphia without much of a plan because my wife was offered a spot in a PhD program that we didn't think she was going to get into. And of course she did because she's wonderful. And so we moved up to Philly, like not knowing anything. And I started doing test prep on the side. So I'd been doing some tutoring before because I was working in the juvenile detention center down in Central Virginia, just a couple hours a week. And I've been doing that for years. And so I'd done some tutoring and I'd done some tutoring in high school and stuff. But jumping into the test prep was just like, it was just a means to like make a wage, basically, living up in Philly. And then I started doing it full time. And I realized that, like, you know, doing the education stuff, not only was it a good way to make a wage with no connections in Philadelphia and moving up there unexpectedly, but it was also like delightful to do. And I really, really enjoyed doing it. And I figured, well, if I was going to do education eventually anyway, I should just do it now because I like it now and I have the opportunity to do it now. So I'll just, you know, I'll throw everything in there and I'll go full time as quickly as I can. So at the time I had been, you know, I was trained by someone at the company who was a learning specialist. And so she had a lot of experience working with kids with all kinds of learning differences. She was like Orton Gillingham trained and stuff. And so she trained me on the test prep stuff. And I already had a little bit of experience because, you know, going in juvenile detention, some huge proportion of those kids, 70, 80%. And it's hard really to tell even have some kind of learning difference. Or, you know, it's affected their school, their learning in some way. Even just the fact of being locked up, right? It affects your schooling in some way. And so I had a little bit of like hands-on experience, but then I got the theory from her. And then she was called away unexpectedly for medical reasons, and I inherited her caseload at that company. And so I just kind of jumped in with both feet and did like trial by fire, doing test prep for kids with all kinds of learning differences for a couple of years. And then I decided to go get myself properly educated. So the test prep stuff has been, you know, full time, like 8 years, but like focusing truly only on people with learning differences has been only about 4 or 5 maybe. But then being kind of in that area and thinking about the minor in disability studies and thinking about disability in general has been 10, maybe. But I come to it from a very practical angle, I guess, because I was interested first in like test prep and tutoring. And only then did I start really thinking seriously about how that stuff is accessible or isn't accessible to different people.
Okay, and the big thing, that I mentioned in your intro and that I think has played a big role in, you going to where you are today. So your career as a mentor began in a juvenile detention center. So how did that experience shape your approach to education and tutoring?
Yeah, that was sort of not on purpose either. To be honest, I mean, I was like 18, right? I was 17, maybe. I was like a college freshman, and there was a club that was doing mentorship at the local juvenile detention center. And I felt like, you have your job fair, your career fair, and you have your activities fair in college. And so at the activities fair, I was talking to the club, and I thought the person who was running it, the president, thought she was pretty cute. So I was like, oh, I'll join this club. And we're married now, by the way, which is why it's I like talking about that, because I like to say it started right then. So it was something that I was doing just because I was trying stuff in college, and I really, really enjoyed it, as it turns out. And the way that it's affected me now is like hard to overestimate, because I did that for years. We were just doing, on the surface, it's supposed to be GED tutoring, basically. We're doing math and we're doing English, basically. We're doing reading and writing, with a group of kids who are at all different ages and all different levels, even if they are the same age. Those classes are really small. We had 10, 15 kids on the unit, and they could have finished 1 year of high school, or 0, or 4 even for the older ones. And so it just like, from an education perspective, it's a challenge to connect with each of them and do something, like deliver a lesson that is useful for all of them. It was hard to do, and I did it wrong for a while. You got to really differentiate your instruction in order to get them all on the same page. But it's more than that too, I think, because those kids don't want to be there. And I don't even mean just like obviously they don't want to be there because they're there against their will. That's one thing. I also don't think that the material is worth learning, right? A lot of the time they're not interested in getting the GED. They don't think that they can, and they don't think that it's a good use of their time. And so the first challenge is not really the material. The challenge is like getting the kids to show up and engage and think that they can do it, that it's possible for them to do, and think that it's a good use of their time. And so that's the hard part, really, with anyone, I think, but also specifically in that situation. And so that was what we spent a lot of time thinking about, in the club, and talking about and thinking, how do we connect with these kids? And that's why it ended up being more of a mentorship thing than a proper tutoring thing. Because we would go into the center a couple times a week, and then they would come to campus once a week. And we're just basically trying to hang out and do fun stuff. We play football, and we, bake pizzas and stuff, and all the stuff that they didn't get to do when they were locked up. And it was that kind of connection that we could build a really strong foundation on for teaching, for getting to actual content. And so I think that the lesson I accidentally learned from that was motivation first, engagement first. Because if you can get the kid to think that, this is worth it, that this is something that they want to do with their time, and that they're going to try, then you can teach anyone anything. So we have to start with that, I think. And I feel like I started doing that in a really hard situation to do that in, and that made me pretty good at it. And now most of my students are kind of easy in that regard. They're studying for the SAT or the ACT, which is totally elective, and so at the very least we have a little bit of engagement, and then we can use that as foundation and build from there. But yeah, it's something that you don't really forget, just thinking the first thing we need to do as the base for our conversation is just to get people to care and think that they can do it and they can succeed. Yeah.
To build on that and your journey into education, what led you into starting NextStep Prep?
Sure. I was working for someone else for many years, and I was it was a multi-state company, and I was in the Philadelphia branch. And I was involved in some curriculum development and some management and stuff. And so I had a lot of leeway in what I could do in the job, and I still felt like everything that I was doing with the students, all the tutoring I was doing, was pretty standard, pretty formulaic. And I understand it. I understood it then, and I sympathize with it now. It's like the SAT is what it is. It's always the same stuff on it, and we can't change what's on the test to better suit the student. But I feel like we could have been doing a better job of differentiating the lessons, and meeting kids where they are. And so I was thinking, I have all these kids just because that became the role that I had at the company, basically. Like, I have all these dyslexic kids, I have all these kids with these attention problems, and specifically like working on timing and pacing strategies isn't a good use of their time. That's not the most effective thing for them, but that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And so the idea was there for a while. And then when COVID happened and a lot of businesses got, there was some sort of turmoil, I decided to go out on my own. And the idea from the beginning was specifically, this is a company of test prep tutors who are going to work with kids with learning differences and meet them where they are and find the best way for them to study for the test, but also find the best way for them to actually sit there and take it in the way that works for them and plays, the strategies that play to their strengths, basically, which probably isn't like super speed timing strategies, but there's a lot of ways to get a lot of points that don't rely on that. And so that's where we started. And the other people I've tried to bring on board either have a background in that already professionally, or they something that they care about a lot, or they have a personal connection to. Because I'm looking for, tutors who have the same idea, basically, which is like we can meet these kids where they are, and there's a better way, I think, to do this kind of test prep stuff and score a lot of points. That isn't based on all the strategies I was doing back in the day, 2016, 2017, kind of.
And so, getting into this a little bit, as you told us, what kind of got you inspired into specializing in supporting students with learning differences. So, if you could talk a little bit about, what you think the biggest misconceptions are about students with learning differences, and how you are working, and how you think people in general can be working to change that perception.
Yeah, this is something I think about a lot. Because we talked about it a lot at my old job, back in 2018, 2019, we were doing curriculum design. The thought was like, there are these kids that we can't help. It's like a lost cause, right? Someone who's scoring so low on math that we basically just don't talk about math, right? Or we hear that they're dyslexic and then we observe them reading and we think, well, okay, I'm not going to help them on the verbal, right? There's not a lot I can do. That's terrible, right? Not only is it a misconception, it's unfair. It's not true. There's a lot of things I think that we can do. So the SAT and the ACT in particular, and I keep talking about those because that's all I really know about is the test. There are very, very specific set of things that we study to do well on them. And they correlate to underlying skills in reading and math and stuff, but they're not the same thing. So the misconception, I think, is like, we can't help those kids with a score below a certain level, or we can't improve the underlying reading ability of this kid. Because it's hard, right? Or because we don't have the tools or the skills. Like, our philosophy, our approach to test prep is basically like the best way in the long term that we can raise test scores is we can improve the underlying skills that the tests are trying to get at. So rather than just like tips and tricks and strategy and shortcuts, there's a place for those, but I think it's not as effective or not as useful in the long term as other stuff. So rather than doing that, we want to make students better readers. We want to improve their numeracy and their fluency and their speed in math and that kind of thing. And all that stuff is absolutely totally possible. And the idea that tests are, especially standardized tests, are not like set up or not designed for people with learning differences is basically true. That's not the misconception. The misconception is that we can't do anything about it. But absolutely, we can do things about it, and we can do things pretty quickly about it too. It's just not talking about like a 1 or 2 year process to raise an SAT score. There's some things we can do very quickly, and these kids are very, very capable, and they're often motivated too. That's something that maybe is a bad takeaway I had from spending time in, when I was doing some juvenile detention tutoring and stuff, is like I assume often that the kids are less engaged and less motivated than they really are. But once they get that first practice test back and they see that the score went up, like they're in it. They're like, hey, my score went up. I can totally do this, and I'm gonna try even harder than before. That's great. So sort of a misconception that they had about themselves that they clear up with evidence, which is great because it's hard to argue with the number going up. If the score goes up, then you got better at doing the thing. And I think that's really nice. It's a sort of a short-term reward that these kids get for studying. It feels really good, and it's proof that they can improve.
How do you tailor your tutoring methods to accommodate students with autism or other learning differences? What do you think you have to do differently, and what do you think are things that you don't necessarily need to change, even though some people feel that you might?
Yeah, there's actually a lot that doesn't need to change all that much. I compare it to classroom teaching. Like when I was doing my classroom teaching hours and my observation hours, when you're working with a group of 10 or 12 or 20 students, the idea of differentiating your instruction so that you are like speaking to different students in a different way and making the information accessible to all of them at the same time, that takes a lot of work and skill. When you're working with someone one-on-one, it is so much easier to do. You're just sort of meeting them where they are. And so there's a couple different components to that. One is just like the way that the information is presented. Our approach is a sort of a full court press on all the senses, right? All of our lessons are visual with a whiteboard with demonstrations. They're also verbal. We're also having students work problems along with us. That's just basic stuff, right? Engaging all the senses as part of the lesson. I think the biggest change on like a day-to-day basis for me is really sort of understanding and growing to understand more how people with autism tend to process information. And I say tends to because everyone is very different. But like on average, in general, our autistic students, when they understand something, the way that you check for understanding as a teacher is, right, so you want to present new information, and then you want to check that the student has learned it, and then you want them to demonstrate it so they build confidence, and then you want to do it again. And there's this kind of loop that happens as you're teaching something. And the traditional check for understanding that you would do just like on the spot is you explain something, and then you say, do you understand this? And then they would say yes, and then there's some variation of like prove it, like prove that you understand this so that I know that you do, and we can move on to the next thing. And usually you just ask them to explain it. And for a lot of our autistic students, that's not a good way to do it. The barrier there is not that they don't understand it, it's the phrasing and the articulation of it, like the verbalization of it into a new idea, into their own words, is like there's enough obstacles to that's not an effective teaching tool. So what we want to do instead is give them a chance to demonstrate that they understand it and that we can really check for their understanding with an example. They're providing their own example, or they're working an example, or they're doing something hands-on that show that they can use something. It's more work for us to check for understanding that way, but it's so much more effective, and it gives them a chance to build some confidence too. And then we can move on to the next thing, or we can kind of poke at what is the misunderstanding that they're having here. And so it can often seem, I think, to like maybe inexperienced educators, or sometimes to parents too, or sometimes to other students, that these kids don't understand something because they can't articulate it in the way that we want to hear it. But that's not the same thing at all, right? Like we can totally understand something and not be able to articulate it in the specific way that the teacher wants, but still be able to use it. And I'm thinking specifically of math here. Like if they're, let's say you learn like factoring an equation, right? You have a quadratic equation and you want to learn how to factor it. And I want to check that the student understands distributing something rather than asking what does FOIL stand for. Can you tell me about FOIL? I can say, distribute this for me and just explain what you're doing as you do it, or show me, on a diagram, or help me fill in this diagram. There's all these different ways that they can explain that they understand something to me that I now know to look for that I didn't before. Same thing with like reading. Like when we change our reading techniques, I'm thinking of something like progressive summarization, right? Where as we're reading a difficult text, the tendency for a pretty skilled reader is to repeat it to ourselves and summarize as we go. And so that's something that is very important to pay attention to for someone who's dyslexic or has some other kind of like a visual impairment, where the first read through is very often they're just reading for the sound and to get the words right and to make sure that they understand what the words on the page say. And if you ask them at the end to summarize, they may not be ready yet. And so what we want to do is we want to have them read everything twice, or we want them to read out loud, or we want them to read in a specific way where they're looking for transition words in between sentences and using those as signposts. So there's all these little techniques we can use for different people, for different needs, to help us understand when they understand something. So a lot of it is that kind of thing. It's not so much the presenting the information in a different way, though I think that helps. It's just like a really effective way of figuring out what they already know. It's really hard when you're a student to, like, you don't know what you don't know, right? And so if you think a math problem is hard, it's really hard as the person doing the math problem to figure out why it's hard a lot of the time. I think having a tutor looking over your shoulder, having someone look over your shoulder who kind of gets how your brain works is very helpful. Because they can help you figure out, like, okay, am I missing a fundamental concept here? Or did I just like transpose two numbers? And so I need to show my work in a different way to help me stay organized, that kind of thing. Like looking for the right thing and learning techniques like that is, I think, super helpful. So I think the question was, how do you tailor your tutoring methods to accommodate? There's a lot of answers, I guess, here. But I mean, we have the luxury of working one-on-one with students, and when you work with someone one-on-one and you get to know them and you start with like the relationship with them as a foundation of that, then you know, either through trial and error or just by asking them, because they often know how their own mind works, the best way to communicate and the best way for them to show their work and show that they're improving and stuff. We can't change, I said this already, but we can't change what the SAT is about and what the ACT is about, the same way that you could in a classroom change the content of what you're teaching. We have to teach factoring, and we have to teach polynomials, and we have to teach exponents. There's like 20 things on the test, and we have to teach all of them. But we can change how we teach them, and we can change how students prove to us that they've learned something so that we can move on to the next thing. Something you do in a classroom is you would differentiate how the assessment works. And so you could have students choose different ways that they're going to demonstrate that they've learned something, taking the test, writing a paper, working on a project, giving a presentation. You have all these choices. And we don't have that, we just have, you take the SAT and you get the number, the score. And that's limiting for us in some ways. And so we try to be more creative in the lessons themselves and give kids a chance to express what they've learned in different ways or creative ways, because they're not going to get the chance to do that on the real test, unfortunately.
And in today's world, where mental health is gaining a lot of attention, a lot of much needed attention. So how do you work on building students' confidence and ensuring their emotional well-being, through this, what can be a particularly stressful time period?
Yeah, it can be stressful, can't it? It's not just the test. It's also like the time when they take it is usually the fall of their junior year. And that's like the worst. I mean, I don't know how you're doing over there, but it's a busy, busy time. There's a lot going on. So it's just like a hard time of life no matter what. So I have like a snippy answer, which is, I think, basically true, but it's hard to hear sometimes. And then I have a longer answer. The snippy answer is the best cure for anxiety is mastery. Like if you really know your stuff and you really know how to do everything on the test, and you have evidence because you've taken practice tests, you have evidence that you're really good at it, then you will basically always get that score. Like if you're really prepared, the anxiety tends to fade. There's only so many times you can like sit down and take a practice test or a real test and be super anxious. If you do it enough times and you're really good at it, it really does fade. And I tell people don't believe me when I tell them that. Students don't tell, don't believe me. And I say, no, like the SAT is the same every time. And every time you sit down to take it, you're becoming more and more of like a veteran. And the anxiety will fade as you really get a grasp on how to do it. But no one wants to hear that. And there are limits to that too. I mean, some people are anxious test takers. Some people are anxious in general. And so there are limits to that. So I think there's a lot of other things we can do to kind of work on confidence. The foundation of that is like unironically is breathing, right? So there's a lot of little things that we ask our students to do to be ready for test day that aren't just studying. So we have a night before the test, like small group session where we bring in a yoga coach and we do some mindfulness and anxiety reduction stuff. But for a lot of the students, we want to be doing breathing exercises just like from the beginning. One of our tutors loves power poses, and we'll always teach power poses. I think there's some kind of interesting science that I find kind of maybe unconvincing behind the power pose stuff. Some people really like it, and it works for them, and so I want them to do it on test day. So the thing that we need to focus on as like tutors is not becoming obsessed with the test score. I think that's like the big thing that I think about a lot is there's so much pressure on the SAT and the ACT as like a vehicle for college admissions. And people talk about test scores and they want to compare test scores to each other. It's a tough thing for us to say as tutors because like, I really don't believe that the test is a measurement of, certainly not of their worth as a person and certainly not of intelligence. And it's kind of just a measure, like it's just its own thing. But that's hard to hear from a tutor, like I'm the person who's talking to them hours a week about, doing their math and doing their homework. And I'm always so excited when their test scores go up. And so it's hard to hear from me that the test score doesn't really matter that much. I really do believe it, that it's not a measure of their worth. It's not a measure of their intelligence. And I say it as much as I possibly can. But what we have to do is sort of prove that that's true by focusing on other things too. And I think that, just from experience, the foundation of that is the relationship that we build with the people that we educate, whether we're tutors or we're teachers or mentors or we're coaches or whatever, like getting to know the student as a person and thinking of them as more than their test score. Like maybe it sounds obvious. Like that really is the key though. Like if you think of the student as a whole person and you appreciate the things about them that are cool and interesting, then they feel that. And in your interactions with that, with them, you can prove that to them, through your conversation and asking how their birthday was and knowing that they're on vacation. I think that the best way to communicate that to them is to really feel it and to demonstrate it through all the interactions. Yeah, but it's tough coming from a tutor to hear that the test score isn't that important. I'll admit that, but it is true.
And to go kind of back towards, what we were talking about earlier about tailoring your tutoring methods and, like personalized tutoring, basically. So NextStep Prep focuses on personalized learning plans for students. So how do you create individualized strategies for each student? And could you talk about some of these programs that you do?
Yeah, I would love to. And this is going to get like a little technical, so just bear with me. So when I say that the programs are like individualized, I really mean it. And there's like a certain set of things that everyone needs to do. Like I'm working on this handout right now for my students. We're like, here's the math facts you need to know for the SAT, and like here's the list of skills. it all fits on a little piece of paper. There's really not that many things. And so ultimately, the personalized plan is to learn those things. But the order in which we do it and how we do it is going to be different for everybody. There's a couple of things that everyone has in common. Like almost no one has taken a formal grammar class in high school. If you took a grammar class, it's probably like elementary school. Like, I don't know, I didn't take one. Did you take a grammar class in high school? I'd be shocked. No, yeah. There's no way, right? But like a third of the points on the SAT, verbal, and like an entire section on the ACT is just grammar. So we all have to learn that, and most of us are learning it from scratch. So that's not really personalized. There's like 10 rules and you learn them. Now, how you learn them is in the sense that we have different ways of teaching it, and some people do better with reading and some do better with speaking. And some just like, hey, here's a list of the rules, please memorize them on your own time. Some people do great with that. So that depends. But most of it is just being really responsive. We're unusual in that we have a group of tutors, and every student works with multiple tutors. So they'll have like a math specialist and have a verbal specialist. And I set it up that way because I'm learning like as I go in this career and like in other stuff that I do, that there's not really any situation where collaboration makes things worse. And so having another tutor who knows what they're doing, meeting with a student at the same time as me that I can bounce ideas off of and we can trade observations. I can be like, oh, reacting to this answer they had where I feel like there really is a concept missing there. Like, what do you think about this answer? Or like, oh, the practice test score was this. It's higher than we expected, or it's lower than we expected. Let's talk about some ideas about what to do. So we meet once a week, the tutoring team, and we talk about every student on our roster, and we talk about how they're doing and what we need to change or what we need to improve for them. And a lot of the personalization really happens there because we're deciding the structural stuff, right? Like some students, they really can only meet for 30 or 45 minutes, and that is their best focus and brain time, and then they got to get out of there. So those students we need to see a couple times a week. And some people, they just want to sit down for 2 hours on a weekend and just really get into it and focus and go deep. And so knowing the student, like that's an easy thing to do that we can change for every person and just like find the right mix. Some people need double verbal sessions. Some people need double math. Some people just need like, if your COVID year, like the year you were in virtual school was like pre-algebra specifically, then like, unfortunately, just because of the way that life worked at that age and in that circumstance, like the math skills are, there's holes in them, you know, and very often people don't have a good foundation in math there. And then algebra 1 was hard. And then they took geometry and then they didn't notice that they were missing some stuff. And then algebra 2 feels like it came out of nowhere. It's super difficult. It's because of stuff they were missing in that particular COVID year. And we need to figure out what those things are. And it's different for different people. And they don't know, because how would you know something that you don't know? And then we need to fill in those gaps. And so our job, I think, as tutors is to figure out like what's missing, and then every week discuss it with each other and fill in those gaps for each other. So we do those things. And then just in terms of like the actual exercises that we ask people to do, you know, people have different levels of patience and different levels of need for how much repetition they need to do and how much it actually works for them. Because some people, they just need to see something once. I'm not one of those people. Some people, they just need to see once and then they're good and they move on to another thing. And I want them to be working on applying and creative problem solving. Some people need to work on identifying when they actually know how to do something. They'll see a new problem, they feel like it's impossible. It's actually something that they know how to do already, but it doesn't occur to them when they're looking at the question, what technique to use. And they just need drills. They just need like, here's what the question looks like. Here's the technique we use. Maybe not even to do the question, but just like repeated exposure to different SAT question types. And so we have this big library of techniques that we want to use for those people. And we just, every week we're getting better and better at, you know, tweaking it for each individual specific person. So we usually start out with a very broad idea, like every student has a goal score that we're working towards, and we'll say, well, we're going to work for the next 2 months or 3 months. Here's the score. So we got to have this many hours of meetings, and we want to get through this many practice tests. It'll be like, you know, 5 or 6 practice tests and like 2 hours of meetings a week is like a good starting place. And then we'll tweak it based on what the student needs. So their availability or their ability or their schedule, and we'll just tweak it based on that, starting with a strong foundation. And then we tweak it week after week. The final plan and what we actually did is almost never what the original plan was. We just make a lot of changes along the way to suit what it is that they need. Some of our students, because everyone does like a assessment consultation thing, and then some people decide we're a good fit and we work with them. Some people decide we're not. Some people were full, and so we can't accommodate them. So I'll write them a study plan, and the study plan is a lot more just I try to get it right on the first try. Here's a bunch of here's an individualized. Here's all the things I want you to do step by step. Go and run with it, kind of thing. And I wish I had time to revisit those and tweak them for everybody. And I just don't have the time. But those are kind of a lot more high pressure. So I feel like I want to get it right on the first try. I don't know if that really answers your question.
No, that did. That went into a lot of detail. Yeah, thank you. And so now I want to ask you about, if you don't mind, could you share a success story where a student with autism or some other learning difference overcame academic or social challenges with your support?
I would love to. And I was trying to think ahead about who I want to talk about. This is a couple that spring to mind. So number one, I'm just super, super proud of is a lot of us, a lot of autistic people early in life, especially early teenage years, we love video games. And we have this idea that we're going to grow up and make video games because it's something we love, right? And you sort of attach to it, you attach to an idea, and you just want to, that's what you spend all your time thinking about. And so you think, well, I can't just play video games as a living. Well, now actually you can, but when I was growing up, you couldn't. So at the time it was the thing is, well, I guess now the calculation would be, I don't want to be a streamer. And then you realize that video game tester is not really a job unless you're coding. And so the idea is, well, I'll make games. I'll be a developer. So a lot of people in high school come to us saying, I'm looking at these schools because they have a game design program, and that's what I want to do. And sometimes that is a good idea and is realistic. And sometimes I want them to consider other things based on their other interests or their other skills. But whenever we make a connection and we can get someone into a program, I love that. That's my favorite thing. So I'm thinking of someone who came to us a couple of years ago who was in this situation, and he was having trouble sort of not playing video games. That's what he wanted to do all the time. His grades were suffering because of that. And he was interested in going to college specifically to do some development. He was already learning coding. He was already developing some 2D games. And I thought, this guy's pretty good. I think this is a good idea as a career for him. He's taking it seriously. He's developing games now in his free time. He's not just only playing games. He's doing a lot of that too. But his ACT was in really bad shape. And the schools he was interested in, technical institutes with a good game design program, his ACT score was maybe not even in the range of getting in. And so we had this really lofty goal. It was 7.5, 8 ACT points, which if you work for long enough is reasonable, but on a short timeline, it's tough to do. And we said, at the very beginning, the problem here is we have to do the work. You can't be skipping homework. We got to get the practice test done. There's a certain number of things you just have to learn and master for the ACT specifically. And this is the work that is in between you and the career that you want. Can we get it done? And that angle turned out to be the right one for him, for getting him disciplined. Not motivated, right? Because motivation is temporary, but disciplined and doing his work every week. And we would connect over the game design stuff, and we'd make sure that he's developing his games and not just doing ACT stuff, and then also the other way around, and make sure he's doing his ACT work as well. And so he ended up going up 9 or 10 points. He got a 34 on his ACT. Not only did he get into the school he wanted to go to, he got a full ride scholarship to that program. So they're paying him to go learn how to design games. And I love that it worked out that way, because it's something that he's living his dream right now. He's a senior right now. So he's got a job lined up. He's going to go be developing games full time. He's working on some 3D stuff now. His art skills have taken off. Something that was just an interest for him, was a passion for him, like a special interest, is becoming his full-time work. And there's no signs, of him burning out. So it's rare that the ACT really matters that much in the course of someone's life. Most of the time, you just got to study and check the box and then be done, and you're done, and it's over. That is a situation where it really did affect the rest of his life, and I'm thrilled about that. So that's one I was thinking of. The other is someone who wasn't really being challenged at school. And this is someone who got their autism diagnosis, the official diagnosis, and got an IEP in place pretty late in his life. He was 14 or 15. And it's one of those situations where he's looking back and thinking like, oh, okay, this makes sense. This is kind of putting the rest of my school and my life in perspective. But that means by the time he kind of came to us and was thinking about the SAT, he was behind in some pretty important ways. And so the challenge there was like, not just how do we get the SAT score up, but we need to build some pretty foundational skills. We need to be thinking about reading and reading critically. His times tables weren't great. We had to like go and work on times tables so that we could work on long division, so that we could work on algebra, so that we could work on all the other stuff that the test is actually about. A lot of foundational work to go there. And we knew it was going to be like a 7 or 8 month process. He was in. I mean, maybe not at first, but we kind of won him over. And he was someone who was very score motivated. Like when the practice test came back and the number was higher, that really motivated him. So then it became for us internally, it was like, how can we keep this guy motivated? How can we make sure that like he's seeing his numbers go up and he's doing his homework for that reason? Because that was the thing that connected with him. And so after 8 months and like 400 points on the SAT, because he's working so hard every day, and we're making him read books, and we're making him, do timed math practice like 3 times a week, which is a huge ask, I think, for anyone in high school, or really kind of anybody. Like he finally got there, and like his underlying reading skills and math skills improved so much that it's a situation where it's rare that the SAT is actually helpful. Like studying for the SAT doesn't really help you in school all the time. But that was a situation where studying for the SAT meant going back and working on all the fundamentals that will, I hope, I'm sure, serve him for the rest of his life. And that is also very exciting for me, because I want the work that we do to matter for a long time. And so looking at someone where like I can objectively say like he's a better reader now, a much better reader, and he's much better at math, and his like mathematical thinking skills are much better, and it's because of the SAT work that we did. That is really exciting. And we had to use the score of the SAT going up as motivation to get him there, but you do what you got to do, I guess.
And I also wanted to ask you about any advice you have for parents or educators who are supporting children with learning differences, especially those on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, this goes back a lot to like the expression that a student has learned something. I think probably the number one mistake that parents make when they are assessing their autistic child's understanding of something is they have an idea in their mind of what it would look like if the student understood something. So you're learning a new skill. Let's say like tying your shoes. That's very straightforward. If you're learning to tie your shoes, my expectation of someone who has learned to do that is that they can tie their shoes by themselves, right? It's very obvious. They're going to sit down with the laces and they're going to do it. What about something like analyzing a text, right? Or like supporting an argument or undermining an argument? A teacher or a parent very often has an idea in their mind of what that would look like. And they're measuring if a student has learned something based on that idea that they have. And they're not articulating it, right? They're not verbalizing it. They're just thinking, this is what it would look like. This is how I'll know that my student has learned something. And the mistake there is it's their criteria of how they would do it, right? What they're looking for from their student is that the student is going to do it the same way that they do. And that's not often appropriate, especially in the humanities, where if we're making an argument, I mean, I guess there's a right way to structure an argument. Maybe that seems really debatable to me. But if you're analyzing a book or something, right, like it's incredibly subjective. And so looking for a certain answer from a student is, I think, a big mistake. If that's the yardstick you're using to determine if they've learned something, I think that's a mistake. Math is a little different because, especially on the SAT, there's a number answer that you're ideally trying to get. But I found that the less I pester my students about how they do the problem, the better. If they're getting the right answer and I understand their thought process and it's generalizable, right? It's not like a one-time trick that only works on that question. I'm all in. Yeah, whatever they want to do. They want to draw it out, they want to graph it, they want to do some kind of weird number trick they saw on YouTube, and that gets them the answer. I don't want my criteria for my own understanding to be what I put on them. And so I think, like, as parents, and then also as educators who are getting familiar working with autistic people, like some people's brains just work different, and they'll arrive at different conclusions or the same conclusion in a different way. And we got to be open to that and understand that the way that they're going to demonstrate that they've learned something might not be what we expect. So to keep an open mind about it and think about the example that they give me, this thing that they're doing to show that they've learned something, does that also show that they've learned something? Sometimes it doesn't. You want to look out for that too, because you don't want them to learn something incorrectly or misinterpret or learn the wrong lesson. But to keep an open mind about it, I think is a good idea.
And looking ahead, what are your goals for the future of NextStep Prep? And how do you envision expanding your impact on the educational community?
I've been thinking about this a lot lately because we've been growing pretty quickly. We're adding new tutors. I'm sort of low intensity hiring all the time, interviewing tutors. Like in the short term, the next 3 or 5 years, what I want to do is build a team of tutors that is, I'm not one of them, but the best in the world. And that's like a lofty goal. Maybe that's an arrogant goal, but I'm serious about it. I think like the very best in the world at doing specifically test prep for kids with learning differences. I think that's something we can do in the next 3 or 5 years, get some of those people in there. And I don't think I'm one of them. I hope that I will be someday. I've only been doing this 10 years. I've crossed the $10,000 mark. So I feel like I know what I'm doing in terms of specifically tutoring SAT, ACT for kids with learning differences. But there's people who've been doing it for 40 years, 50 years. And I would love to get good enough that they notice me. And then I can bring them on board and get them involved in the project. So I'm excited about that idea. In the much shorter term, we have a small group that I am trying to give away for free or as cheap as possible, as much as I possibly can. I think that there's this huge price barrier to really good test prep, and especially test prep that is like really effective. And I want to reduce that barrier as much as I possibly can. And also our small group is, I think, a good way to do that. It's the best way I've found so far. If I find something better in the next couple of years, I'll do that instead. But everyone does it like an intake and an orientation, and I write them a study plan that is as individualized and personalized for them as I possibly can. And then they go in the small group and they get office hours and they get support and stuff. And right now that's a really good mix, a really good balance of individualized attention and not totally dominating our time as a company. And I would like to expand that. And I mean, I would love to give away 100 or 200 of those spots a year if I possibly can, and just get, some kind of professional test prep and oversight for some kids who I think would benefit from it. I'd love to do that. We're not on track yet this year. So, maybe next year we'll hit that 100 mark.
I also want to ask you my last question. Is there anything else you'd like to say that you think, we didn't cover over this?
Oh man, it's a good question. Yeah, here's something. So just, I think maybe a useful way to think about learning. And again, the only thing I can speak to is SAT and ACT prep for kids with learning differences. That's kind of the only thing that I know about. But I think that the role of a tutor in that situation is like, there's a certain set of questions that will definitely be on the SAT or the ACT, and the student doesn't know how to do them yet, but they can learn very easily. Like for every person who's doing test prep, that set of questions exists. And the job of a tutor or a parent or a teacher or even another student or the student themselves is to figure out what those questions are first, and then to learn them as effectively and efficiently as possible, and then practice them until they're great, and then find out what the new set is. And approaching it that way, I think, cuts out a lot of the problems with trying to like the obstacles to learning for neurodiversity. Because if you're just thinking about what are the questions that this student could learn very easily that will definitely be on the test and they don't know how to do right now, like you can think of what those questions would be. And I think a lot of people could think of what those questions could be for themselves. And then you just learn them as effectively as possible for you, whoever you are and whatever your needs are. If you just do that once a week for like 10 weeks, then you'll be great at the test. So that's how you should do it. And that's what we try to do here too. But I think a lot of people could do that on their own as well.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fishell, for this wonderful conversation. And congratulations on all the amazing success you had so far. And I'm looking forward to more. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, thanks for your time.